Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to DAO or not to DAO, Building Governance in Web3. So we have an exciting set of panelists here. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves with Isla first, and then Igneus and Nicolas.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Isla from For the Win DAO, also part of Bankless DAO and building DAOVOS. So it's like Davos for DAOs, a decentralized democratic event. With For the Win DAO, my main project, we're decentralizing venture capital for a more diverse and future-oriented world.
Thank you. Should I get that one or? Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Igneus Terrenus. I'm the public liaison for BitDAO. It's one of the largest DAO in terms of on-chain treasury. BitDAO was established in July 2021 with an open mandate to foster technology that will help people to work, engage, and transact in new ways. We have started initiatives such as Game 7, that is a collaboration with the gaming company Forte to build blockchain games. That's a 500 million venture, and then there's 200 million towards ZK Sync to create the ZK DAO to foster just like zero knowledge proof, and there's a bunch of things that we do. BitDAO recently also launched a EVM chain, Ethereum Layer 2, called Mantle. We are in testnet stage at the moment. Mainnet is coming in Q2 or Q3. It's currently optimistic roll-up, but we're also very optimistic of its future. And we may eventually move to a zero-knowledge consensus when the mainnet drops. And I'll pass the mic to my friend Nicolas.
Hello, my name is Nicolas. I'm co-initiator of Q Protocol at Q.org. We're building a decentralized governance stack for Web3. So a lot of, or most of the governance for DAOs or other decentralized organizations is taking on off-chain. So only a few things are on-chain. And that's because they include intent and human value and discretion. So are not binary. And we're providing a decentralized way of including that into DAO governance and thereby enabling DAOs to build what we call intergalactic future organizations.
I'm also going to introduce myself. I'm Theo. I'm with Safe DAO, DAO coordination lead. And Safe, formerly known as Gnosis Safe, is a smart contract account standard now moving into an ecosystem with SafeDAO. And to kick this round off, I believe one interesting angle is, since we are all working in DAOs and closely exposed to some, so why are these organizations a DAO? Why have they chosen a DAO as an organizational type?
Yeah, so in our case with For the Win DAO, it's we had this mission to make venture capital and the investment ecosystem far more diverse. That was because we could see from the data that diverse-led companies perform considerably better. And by diverse, we mean genders, background, diversity of thought, and all sorts of things. But ultimately, at the moment, 92% of venture capital is going to all male teams, and that's on gender. There's a lot more data than on other aspects. And what we realized was, if we want more money going to diverse teams, we need a lot more diverse investors in the ecosystem. How do we get there? We need to get a certain amount of scale. And in traditional venture funds, it's very centralized, it's very small. We realized that with DAOs, we could essentially bring investing to the people so that anyone, anywhere can find a startup and identify their potential and bring them into the mainstream. So the DAO model for scouting startups, but also for supporting them and scaling them in the future, struck us as particularly high potential. The other DAO that I'm working on, DAOVOS, the thing was that we realized that too many events are curated based on who sponsors the event. And we wanted to create a more democratic, transparent way of curating who should be speaking at important events representing the Web3 ecosystem. So we're sort of trying to move to a world where the Web3 ecosystem decides who is the most important voice to come on stage and talk about solutions and what we want to build next. So yeah, that's from my side.
Thank you. Yeah, so BitDAO was established to be able to basically take longer-term bets on a number of things that that are not immediately market ready. So we see that these are the futures that will basically onboard the next billion users, or let's start small, next 100 million users to Web3, and so BitDAO was initiated by centralized exchange Bybit. It's the world third most visited exchange, just behind Binance and Coinbase. But a lot of things that Bybit wants to do, it can't do as a centralized exchange. It can't do it through venture capital. But what it thinks it could do is basically by putting together that vision, having a purpose, which we think is really important, and then you can basically organize a community around that purpose, which is to onboard the next 100 million, next billion. Sometimes we, when we are very optimistic, we take it up in magnitude. When it's bearish market, we talk about a smaller number. But in any case, we are taking longer term bets on those things that we know will be important for the Web3 future. We know will be important to onboard more people who, maybe they want the service, but they are scared by, say like the UX of a wallet. We want to make those experiences, technology as seamless, as intuitive as possible, and those sometimes take longer, sometimes is not immediately visible for investors how their investment is doing. So we thought doing it through a DAO with the backing of some of the largest and most famous investors in the world, but not as investors but as partners who believe in this vision, will be a better way to bring about that future.
So when we started, we realized how great this new governance through code as law is, what it can do. But we also realized that it has clear limitations. I mean, not everything can be coded. The world as such cannot be coded. And then what we saw is, as soon as you go or try to go beyond code as law, then you only have a few options, like you have forking, outright fight, which we see a lot in communities. And we decided we need to find a way to include intent and discretion and vision into governance, and do this in a similar decentralized fashion as code as law is. And that's why we started to build the Q protocol, and that's why we're living up to that. It's kind of walking the talk. We need to have the same kind of robustness and security in those elements of governance that go beyond code as law, as we have in code as law. That means for us we're applying the same mechanisms of decentralized governance that we offer as services. I must, however, say that building a product and starting with a DAO is maybe not the best idea. So we started fairly centralized and are on a path to decentralization, which, by the way, is also one of, if not the largest reason for regulatory authorities that gave us positive clearance in terms of the Q token is not a security and all of these kind of things, because they looked at how the governance had been set up and whether we're living by it the way we described it in what we call our constitution.
Yeah, picking up on what Nicolas said on starting out developing your product and potentially decentralizing over time, this is also what is the case at SAFE. So SAFE has been around for many years, was initially built within Gnosis when they needed a multi-sig for their own needs, and today or last year SAFE launched SafeDAO, and why? I believe that is really one really interesting angle here is the ecosystem. When you think of SAFE today, it has evolved from a product into an ecosystem, into a whole range of projects that are reusing SAFE infrastructure in all kinds of ways. And that a company or a team managing that product doesn't do it justice anymore. So once you have that scale of an ecosystem relying on a certain tooling, I believe a DAO is a really good mechanism to coordinate the longevity of that infrastructure, to prioritize certain aspects like robustness or resilience or other factors the community decides on, but it should really be the stakeholders and users of that technology, I believe. So that is one motivation out of many for SAFE to launch SAFE DAO. And I think we have seen a few very interesting angles here with each of the DAOs we're exposed to and have experience with. So I think maybe to dive a bit deeper here about the types of DAOs. So I think we've seen very interesting. So as we all know, DAOs are universally applied on all kinds of things. And I believe we have a bit of like product market fit ahead of us, or we'll see some DAOs, some types of DAOs succeed and others will fade away. But what kinds of DAOs, how would you describe yourselves? I believe we have protocol DAOs, social DAOs, investment DAOs. We have other types of DAOs. How would you each describe your DAO as a type?
Yeah, so For the Win DAO has ambitions to build an investment DAO ecosystem. And one of the things that we realized was if we want to bring more investors into the ecosystem, we can't build something that's only for accredited investors. So we wanted to build something that anyone can be part of. And that's why we started with a social DAO and are going to build out essentially an ecosystem of DAOs around our mission to diversify venture capital. And then with DAOVOS, it's also a social DAO, but it's going to be a DAO of DAOs. So an organization made up of other DAOs and individuals.
Yeah. So the BitDAO core acts as an investment DAO, but so like the way we have grown and developed is that we have a number of autonomous entities that basically venture into or foray into areas where there will be tremendous growth, and they are like kind of like having those fractal opportunities. Say for example, Game 7 is a gaming accelerator collaboration with Forte, and they are run completely independently from BitDAO. BitDAO itself, everything, all the decisions when it deals with like on-chain action, when it deals with allocation of treasury assets, everything is voted in. But what we do with those autonomous entity is that once they are executing on their mandate, the budget is completely within their control. So like we have ETHTLV that is a collaboration with some of the world's most prestigious higher education institutions, blockchain society. So like Harvard's blockchain society, Cambridge, MIT, they work with ETHTLV, and then we bring those education to university students who are interested in the space. We also have Sozo House that we run hackathons and hacker houses around all the ETH global events. So developers who go to those events, they no longer need to find their community, no longer need to find a coffee shop to walk. They can just go to the Sozo House. And we have Africa DAO that is developing kind of like education and providing like data services and data like availability on the continent to kind of like help young people find their calling. We're also working with Plaza DAO to curate art. So we kind of like the core function of BitDAO is a large democracy where everything is done through governance. But for those autonomous entities that are separate and that are separate but connected to the core, they are run like, you know, they're not run in a DAO governance model, but they kind of like are working with DAO and participating in DAO governance.
I think it's super interesting to listen to all the different kinds of DAOs that are. It's almost like the many very different kinds of organizations and companies you have. And this is kind of like, I like to look at DAOs. I mean, DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. So you have large groups of like-minded people who span across nations or across the globe, and they want to find a way to organize themselves and maybe raise some money or build a product or whatnot. Or you have a DeFi application, and MakerDAO is a great example. They are also an organization with a product. Some of those are not really decentralized, so maybe they're not DAOs. Some of them want to be decentralized but don't have the right tools yet, or whatnot. So for us, we started off as a protocol DAO, if you will, and then we do have a first integrated application, which is a lending and borrowing protocol. So that's a DeFi DAO or investment or like finance DAO. But if you think about it, even like really large societies, like in nation states, they are in a way self-organizing or like autonomous organizations. That doesn't play out so well many times, but if it does, then the people decide how they want to live, by which rules they want to live, who they decide to give certain jobs to do and so forth, and who's calling the shots eventually, and also who's taking the risk eventually. Because I think that's a very, very important aspect of DAOs. You know, it's like, who's going to be there if something goes wrong? You know, it's like, who's the lender of last resort or whatever it is.
That's very interesting. And Nicolas, I would like to pick up on that point when you started describing the type of Q protocol as a DAO. Turns out there are several layers. A protocol DAO initially, which decided to have other initiatives, which then again operate on different levels, other layers. And then you mentioned nation-state democracy. So curious to hear your and everyone's thoughts on what is the ideal governance model that DAOs should try to emulate or perhaps start learning from. So Nicolas, I hear you're tending towards the nation-state governance type as opposed to corporate governance. So how do you see DAOs making use of these existing best practices and picking what's right for them, leaving out what's not right for them, but not starting from a blank sheet, right? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I don't lean towards nation-state for DAOs. I believe the world of organizations is so diverse that you should always start with the question, what do we want to do? Like, what is it that we want to decide? And then there's a multitude of voting mechanisms and schemes that you can look at. And one person, one vote is just one, and one token, one vote with the risk of plutocracy is another one. And then there's so many, but I think you should always really start with a very simple question: what is it that I want to do? And try to be very precise with that. So.
Yeah, I just really want to build on what Nicolas just said about you want to be like, you really want to show your intention from the get-go. So the people who coalesce to congregate around this this venture, they are aligned in that vision. I think sort of like talking about whether it's like a nation state or like city state or like corporate governance, I think in one way like DAO is potentially a alternative to the LLC model, but I do like to aspire to kind of like how a democracy, like a polity, either a city state or a nation state is run. So I'm a huge Phil Hilling. I really like Greek history, Roman history. So like the ancient Athenian democracy, the ecclesia was really appealing to me, even though they did a lot of things wrong. But basically, like, there's women don't get vote, slaves don't get votes, but basically land owning, property owning men, they voted on matters big and small, including wars, including to ostracize someone. So like to ostracize someone is actually from the word for the pottery shards that they vote to basically expel someone. And they voted on everything, and a lot of it, like sometimes they don't have the vote. What they do, or like sometimes they are not influential enough, or they're not rich enough. They have this speaker's bema on the Mount Pnyx. It's actually the mountain just on top of Socrates' prison. You can still visit. People like to think, oh, maybe it's the Acropolis is where democracy happened. No, it's not. It's the Mount Pnyx. And so long as you are willing to speak, you can stand on the bema and use your rhetorics to sway the votes, which I think is a very powerful tool. Because, the problem with plutocracy, if someone, like what happens with, the late Uniswap V3 wormhole BSC bridge situation, like it's A16Z and Jump and a bunch of large holders duking it out. But what if, smaller token holders, instead of feeling kind of like discouraged to cast their vote because they know it's not going to matter, what if they are given a very large voice? They are able to participate in kind of like this period before the actual vote take place, to actually sway large voters, to actually find enough support for the position. Then I think it becomes more participatory, and it also kind of like makes the simple act of accumulating more token less powerful a tool to control whatever governance process should take place.
Yeah, so I think so I'm going to speak from the experience of different DAOs that I've been involved with, and like what I've seen working and not working. I think what corporates do well is that you have skin in the game equals what say you have. And so there's a clear incentive for the people that need to be involved in corporate governance. What they maybe don't do so well is the fact that there are a lot of other stakeholders involved in a corporate that are not necessarily involved in terms of not having capital in the game. What nation states maybe do well is that everyone kind of feels included, and you have this representative democracy, which seems to work well for maybe certain ethical questions. But like on a practical level, what we've seen, for example, in Bankless DAO and in various like sub-DAOs of Bankless DAO, you can't have one person, one vote. You need to have a certain sort of group of core people, in most cases, that are incentivized to put in effort and time and to build something of value. And that's something that more like kind of how we've done it with For the Win. We've started centralized. We have a token to incentivize the core team, and we're gradually over time decentralizing. And we've set some clear like values and ethics around how our token will be distributed, so that people know from the get-go that we're gonna stick to certain values. I think what I sort of see working is to have this, you can put in capital and get tokens, but there also needs to be a balance of people who have built reputation. So there are people involved in For the Win DAO who've put capital in but have absolutely no idea of the day-to-day operation of a DAO. They don't understand Web3 particularly well, and I think they get our vision, but they're maybe not, they don't have time essentially to be involved on a emotional and operational level. And it wouldn't make sense for us to purely base our governance longer term on what they think. At the same time, they put in capital early, they backed us, and they were extremely necessary. And we need to incentivize those people. So I'm tending towards a model where you sort of incentivize capital and other forms of effort, but you also wait for actual involvement and potentially, like, over time, take capital or take governance rights away when people have been not involved for a long time, because otherwise you kind of end up with this issue of like legacy of people that have not been involved and aren't involved, having too much say at a point in time where that's maybe not any more relevant knowledge. But yeah, I hope that kind of
Yeah, these are fantastic examples, and I think we'll come to questions in a few minutes. So just maybe wrapping up here, I think we can all have a lot to say on what works and what doesn't work. And if you come back to the question to DAO or not to DAO, I believe lots of people who are potentially getting started with an idea, have a group of friends, have a product, have something else where they see a DAO as a potential form of organization, will probably each have a few ideas on how to best go about that. Just briefly on the token voting question, I believe that is a really good angle, ties in also well with corporate or nation state governance. So can we make another round on your thoughts on which layers in your DAOs do you see nation state governance more relevant, and where does corporate governance apply? For example, when you balance decentralization in the sense of the community should have an equal say on moral or long-term matters, but then also be efficient and productive in the short term, and you just have to execute things and come to quite operational things. So perhaps some examples from your DAOs you've seen on how do you balance decentralization with efficiency, and then we'll come to the best practices.
Should I? I think that's a super interesting question. So if you look at different levels, on the layer 1 level validators, that's just your standard proof of stake, delegated proof of stake validator set with everything you want to see there. You want to see a plutocracy there because that's kind of the incentive game you want to see there. But then there's this concept of distribution of powers, where you have their job, what they are supposed to do, but you have to have some way to make sure that they do their job correctly. So you have another layer that needs to be completely independent of those, which we call root nodes. And for them, it's one root node, one vote. So that's a completely different kind of voting because they need to be independent. And then one might ask a question, but wait a minute, what are the rules all of this is working on? Who's deciding about those rules? And for us, it's the community. Like all of the Q token holders, they decide on what we call the Q constitution. And so there it's again, one token, one vote. And for some very specific question, we have a system which we call QID, which has like where like one person, one vote has a veto right to make sure that you combine kind of the best of many worlds in order to find the right approach to the specific task or question at hand. So from my perspective, I think it's excellent because as a takeaway, not one size fits all in these kind of things, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with one size doesn't fit all. I think sort of when it comes to rulemaking and like creating quorum and how in general things should be done, how operations should be run, how actions that are decided should be carried out, those require more of a nation-state participatory democracy. Whereas when we're actually building a project that is like, you know, going to be rolled out to the market, I feel like, you know, a more corporate way of doing it, and then you have the traditional kind of like performance metrics will be better. Say, for example, we are rolling out this layer 2, and then, you know, we are asking the community to allocate some funds from the treasury for the Mentos development, so that we set very clear performance metrics. We want to have this many unique users, we want to have this much on-chain transactions, we want to onboard this many apps, and then all those funds that we ask for are going to be deployed in trenches based on performance metric. If we meet this performance metric, then there's more money coming from. But in terms of how the money is spent to accomplish those goals, those will be basically up to the project team. So it's kind of like, you know, when we talk about the general frame setting being like a, you know, framers for like a constitution, those definitely nation state. When it comes to the actual executing, even kind of like a lot of times when you are like asking a government agency to do something, it's run more like a corporation than, you know, an actual government.
Yeah, and picking up on I totally agree that for these kind of decisions on process and governance and how things should be and kind of ethical, I think it makes a lot of sense to have a lot more involvement from the community and a lot more thought and consideration. And what we're kind of seeing working is to have that. So we started out as a fully centralized team and are going with this progressive decentralization. And what we're seeing is emerging is that we operate as a centralized team, and then as the team gets bigger, it becomes less and less centralized, and we have to split it off into kind of squads. But within those squads, they're kind of their own, let's say, DAO democracy of their topic. And I think we don't really have the tooling yet to reflect what's emerging from like human behavior. But I definitely think there's an aspect of centralization. You need centralized little groups of people to make expert, fast decisions on their topic. But those smaller groups can be kind of DAOs and democracies within themselves. Yeah, I'd be really curious though to hear a bit from maybe Vita DAO and Safe, how your experiences have been.
Yeah, I think the layered approach is really something I would echo. Like, consider all the approaches, and depending on the top layer or the operational layer, you have different fits for purpose. And I think this is also a really good insight, hopefully for the audience to take away. One, and just opening it up for questions. Do we have some? We have one. Okay. Two.
So I think one of the places where the whole decentralized part of DAOs gets tested is when it's time to incorporate. Right, so if you want to pay salaries, if you want to like maybe rent a building, pay vendors, you need to be based somewhere. So for example, Gnosis DAO, recently they were talking about incorporating Wyoming DAO. That became a huge discussion that got shut down. So my question for you guys is, are any of your DAOs incorporated anywhere? And how do you decide where to incorporate your DAO?
Yeah, I think I can briefly start. So with SafeDAO, there's the Safe Ecosystem Foundation, a Swiss foundation that is currently at the root of Safe. And SafeDAO is really growing out of that. That is all still in the works, but the basis is a Swiss foundation.
With For the Win, we are a Swiss association, and I totally agree with you that it is very challenging, especially starting as a centralized team. You want to delegate more to the community, but you have a legal responsibility. So a lot is, and that has been one of our big learnings, is when you put yourself in that position of creating something with a legal entity, you do take on a lot. So it may actually make sense to build up some traction before you go that route. Obviously, keeping within the law, but it's a lot of responsibility. So. And often the community takes a lot of time to catch up to be able to support, so that also makes sense. Yeah, so I guess the kind of takeaway for me has just been like, maybe if I did it again, I would only incorporate once I had a certain amount of traction and community support behind us.
So BitDAO itself is not incorporated, but there are labs that are executing on the mandate. Say, for example, we're building Game 7, we're building Mental. Those are labs, teams that are incorporated. So the main lab currently for BitDAO is called Wind Ranger. It's more than half of the colleagues are in the States. And it's incorporated in both the United States and I think one of the island nations, as you do. So the idea of like our setup is really kind of like, at the moment, Wind Ranger is executing those well. But if in the future there's a better team, a better project team come along, and they're better at certain tasks, then the community can vote for them to take the reins for another venture, or maybe for all the ongoing kind of like work that are being done. But at the moment, so Wind Ranger is the labs team incorporated entity that is executing some of the main mandates from BitDAO, which itself is not incorporated.
So that's similar for us. The Q protocol is not incorporated. It's a fully decentralized protocol. It was initiated out of a non-for-profit foundation in Liechtenstein, And in order for them, because they're non-for-profit and regulated, to be able to do things like pay for services that are supporting the protocol, they have an entity in Liechtenstein, and they can do stuff there. But just as you said, you know, whenever there's somebody else doing a better job, and there are some others already today that are just working and supporting the protocol, there's no one legal entity. And maybe as a little bit of a challenge for thoughts, I don't believe that a true DAO in a digital decentralized space should be incorporated. You should be incorporated out of necessity as soon as you want to engage with the physical world in a region. But if you're not, you should not be, and that's not advice, that's a challenge, you know. It's like, so we're trying to find ways for DAOs not having to be incorporated until they want to have, I don't know, like something on the ground. Because in my view, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions. I think you were first.
Yeah, it was a question for you. You were mentioning before, like how you first started off as a centralized structure, and you moved into like a more decentralized. What are the biggest challenges in this transition? Because I guess that there are a few of them.
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges is, of course, if you start centrally and you open up fairly, is just building a community, engaging people in that community, and trying to get them and their work behind the project, not just participating in terms of like we're there, but we're actually putting work into this, and I think that's one of the most challenging. And of course, you know, like if you start up very centrally, you are so much quicker, which is a trade-off of decentralization. Decentralization is amazing, it's very robust, but it's very slow at the same time. And there is this inherent notion of like, come on, let's just do it. That's like, no, you know, we want to do this right, and let's do it right. So maybe those are a couple of challenges.
So the bottom line is that when you get the community members to feel that they are actually an active part of what's being built, like they're having this active role, right?
Yeah. And it's like I don't know how many of you have kids. I have 4. So it's a little bit like seeing a kid grow up. I believe, that's my personal belief, as a parent, all you should do is like from behind kind of set the boundaries, pick them up once in a while, like pet them a little, go faster or slow them down, but let them be, you know, and kind of find their own way. And that's a little bit like with the DAO, you know, it's like you should not entrust too big things for the community to be, otherwise they're going to be overwhelmed, just like a kid. And then see it grow, and then put more and more and more to them. But we're not there yet, you know. So we're on the way.
Yeah. So I have a question for you regarding not incorporating. How do you limit the liability of your members and your founders if you are not incorporated in any jurisdiction?
That's a question, and I cannot answer that fully because. Maybe that's so my background is law, and like I was a long time ago trained as a lawyer, and one thing you learn is there is no such thing as a bulletproof limitation of liability, because if some nation state, some jurisdiction just claims to have jurisdiction over something, they will. And we see that with very large nation states like the US or so, they just claim to have jurisdiction over something. There's no way you can get out of this. So, but I do believe there are many ways you can limit your liability, your factual liability. Start with rules. You know, like if you have proper rules and rules that are effective and that they're precise and that they're executable, you know, not so much will happen, just factually, not so many disputes, if you have a proper integrated dispute resolution mechanism. So you already had, on a private level, decided on an alternative. You know, like maybe judges will say, like, well, you know, like, I'm not claiming jurisdiction over that. You're not even a citizen of my country. You do this privately. Like, a lot of international trade is done privately through private arbitration and so forth. But there's no way I know of, and there are probably much smarter lawyers in this room than I am, but there's no one way to say, like, okay, I'm going to get rid of all the liability, and especially not if you want to do everything at the same time, you know?
So I guess to rephrase that, you're saying have a DAO policy that is actually executable. If anything goes wrong and a specific member does something wrong, then you point the jurisdiction that is chasing you into the DAO policy.
Yeah, you can also, in that policy, you can also agree on a certain jurisdiction to apply, like a certain kind of law, if you like, Swiss law or whatever. But it's always better to have something than to have nothing at all. I mean, this is a notion that I believe is entirely wrong in the Web3 space, where many people believe that without any self-regulation or any regulation, whatever, or any rules, you know, there are no rules. You know?
Fantastic. I think we have to make a stop here in the interest of time. We did cover a lot of ground. I hope this was useful to the audience. And I think we have actually a few more minutes. So we could have another question, or we could have a last round from the panelists, how they would summarize the discussion for you to take away like specific steps on how to start a DAO, whether to start a DAO or not. Is there a question? Otherwise, I think this could be good value too. A really quick one.
What is, in your opinion, the best jurisdiction for DAOs at the moment? And I know you guys are not lawyers specifically. It sounds like you are, but like just from your experience.
I'm a big fan of Switzerland. Very happy with that in most forms. I think if you're wanting to do investment DAOs, potentially the US or Cayman. But I'm very happy with Switzerland overall, and I would definitely be like, Switzerland.
I wouldn't necessarily talk about jurisdiction shopping, but I know like Montana is trying to do something that is very conducive to DAO creation. But I think I want to kind of like talk about something else in the sense that I think in the beginning, echoing what Nicolas just said, you want to have the proponents of rulemaking in the beginning. You almost want to do like what Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and James Madison did with the Federalist Papers. You kind of like make your intention really clear, so everyone who is a part of your community, they know what is allowed, what is not allowed, what basically will put you beyond the pale of, you know, the community. And then that would also help to attract the right people, instead of, you know, some people who might be coming in for ulterior motives and then basically rake the name of the DAO in the muck. I think it's just kind of like, I like what, sorry, a little bit of tangent. I like what the late great Justice Ginsburg used to say. You know, when the Constitution was first drafted, it wasn't perfect, right? Like when it says we the people, women weren't counted, colored like black people weren't counted, like indigenous Americans weren't counted, and then, you know, when they count kind of like census, black people in the South were counted 3/5, but it has this capacity in the beginning. It's embracive. So there are three amendments after the Civil War that conferred those rights to people, and the United States in that 3 century of existence, 2+ century of existence, become more and more embracive. The idea of we the people have expanded. I think you want to, even if you don't have the full perfect setup in the beginning, you want to have that kernel of capacity for that to happen.
So that was an independency. That's kind of what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know how much. Yeah.
No, it is a great question. We should have a separate panel on that alone.
Yeah.
So to wrap this up and have a last round of takeaways, perhaps each of you could think back of your journey in your DAO and in other DAOs. Think of fallacies. Think of ways that went wrong. what is one thing you would choose to mention to someone who is thinking of starting a DAO, something they should focus on getting right? What is the single and most important thing for someone when they look at DAOs to potentially apply to them?
Yeah, so short and sweet. I think start with values and what you want to achieve, and really be clear in your values and build from there. And if DAOs are of a lot of interest to you, we have a separate side event as part of BuildingBlocks as well tomorrow, DAOvos, and we'll be covering a lot of these topics more in depth as well there. So yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
I was gonna say what Isla said, but since she said that, I'm gonna. I had an idea. Maybe Nicolas, go first. I just said that.
Okay, so I would say I really like, by the way, what you just said before. I really like that. So that's a good takeaway. I would say start small, like really be precise and think about whether what you put down in rules or whatever can be executed in whatever way, but start, you know. It's much better to have something than not to have everything. You don't have to have everything right away, but you gotta have something.
Yeah, I'll have a little bit of devil's advocate. So if you just want to kind of like for the branding of it, or like just to kind of like for DAO is popular, you want to do a DAO, don't do it. Like, so decentralization, even like blockchain, is not a great tool for like there's if you just want to kind of like get data when you want data, cloud is better. So it's a tool for a purpose. Decentralization itself is not a terminal good. It's not like, oh, I'm decentralized, I'm automatically good. It should be you have an intention, you have something, and then decentralization or DAO is the best means to achieve it. Then there is a reason for the raison d'être for its existence. Otherwise, it just feels like, because everyone's doing a DAO, let me do a DAO as well. Then I try to find a reason for it along the way, which is kind of like not that great.
These are fantastic takeaways, I think, and I would just add one tiny perspective to it. When you start a DAO and you think of which on-chain voting framework to choose, how to define your code infrastructure, that is all good and fine and usually should be part of a DAO. But don't underestimate the soft governance part, the social dynamics that happen before an on-chain vote happens. So sometimes they are poorly defined and quite inefficient. Oftentimes they are neglected at all and just chaotic, or tyrannical, even if they are really undefined. So pay attention to the soft governance and not exclusively only to the on-chain governance. And I think at this point we'll make a cut. I think I hope this was interesting, going quite broad, and please reach out to each of us to follow up on these DAOs, and thank you all for your attention.